Yes, let's see if this gets out of the way. Right, so this is the shared lectures. And this is the case studies by Professor Song, which are quite interesting. Actually, this was when we were doing Maronier, so this is already familiar place. Yes. And if I see from the sky, this building top doesn't look as complex as we do in the model. That the model is, maybe they changed. Maybe we can use the different. Maybe this is an old photo. Maybe old was better than new. Okay, everybody, welcome. Let me check the sound. Yeah, it is going on. Okay. So today in building systems, we have the lecture on acoustics, and we have to lock out the microphone of the classroom because it was terrible. It was kind of big echo and so it was very much in purpose. So I had to go like just a plain voice lecture. So this is Professor Songryul lecture. This is the same for the previous years, but okay, we can use it. We have permission. It has quite interesting case studies, and we will see them. I skipped the part in which she analyzed the Alco building because it is not our purpose, so it is interesting. And she started with one movie we commented in class also, okay, Mon Oncle, which is 1958, you see on the right. It is a movie you can find in YouTube or almost anywhere. And it's quite interesting because this is done in the moment in which France, Paris was rebuilding from the war. And it's kind of field of experience for modern architecture. And as we commented before, it's kind of very critical with the modern architecture. So this is kind of a comedy, right? But it has kind of very, very patent critic to that kind of dream to be very mechanical and very modern society. And the protagonist is the uncle, which is the guy with the pipe, and the nephew, which is the son of a rich man making a modern house. And Jacques Tati actually is a Russian-French director. So maybe it's a Jacob Tati chef. So this is the house. Actually, it was designed in purpose for the movie. And now it is in the museums of modern art as kind of a achievement. And it had all the kind of design and mechanization you can dream about, 1958. And this is the happy couple, right? The housewife and the successful businessman prototype. And as we commented, this is the scene we saw in class, these kind of two ladies crossing the garden to say hello. Right. Yeah, this scene here. And all the spaces, the life is like a very artificial. So there's like a specific spot of the garden to enjoy the sunshine and to take a cup, or the automatic door of the parking, which shuts off, and the dog stays there, and the couple look through the windows for somebody to open again because it's automatic. And the dog only has to cross the photoelectric cell, but he never goes there. It's kind of dystopic. Or the kind of obsession for hygiene, for cleanliness, in which the mom will take her gloves to clean his boy after being playing with his friends. Actually, if he were to be eating all dirty and cheap street food, they would find out. Then at home, they will have everything totally sterilized to avoid bacteria. Of course, he has not any taste. So the kitchen is kind of laboratory rather than one kitchen. But what he really enjoys is just going around to his uncle, which is kind of all the style guy. And the old house in which it's totally the opposite, right? You meet the neighbors, whenever you go in or out, you meet somebody, you speak. And this is something which kind of is lost in our projects. How this space from the street to the house, we have even tiny courtyard, this place for stopping, meeting. It's not like you're going straight as the modern guys going to the parking and then hoping for the dog to move, right? And the house is totally illogical, but still going home and going to the stairs and so on has some kind of also of a joy, right? You have a long way and you can enjoy the laundry of your neighbors or the birds singing, so on. So is this contrast, which again, it was written in 1958, but yet is something which persists. Architects insist on making very cool and very modern and very innovative houses, but still people choose to live in classical houses, right? Which is something we should think about. And this is the confrontation, right? The old guy with the modern social guy, and the disappearing traditional city against the modern but more impersonal city. So now let's see a few examples from extensions and reuses. The first one is quite interesting. It's a little bit, well, the idea of the city is that the city itself is a scape, right? It's not a natural landscape, but it's an urban landscape you are really in which. And this is a German project. It is a gallery, and I guess, I don't know if it is artificial or real ruin, but it's just a small remaining of a building, and extension is just making this useful. So whatever is behind is just a tiny box with an exceptional space, a couple of containers to give the functionality they need. So this is like a minimum space for exhibition and a huge monumental front, which probably is a remaining of a demolished building, a superior building, which this has to do with our requirement to deal with the structures. Facade alone doesn't stand, needs some kind of structural reinforcement so it stands up. Well, this is how it stands in the street. So the context is almost no context. So this is like a very rhetoric in that sense. It's very much in the Venturi's. We spoke about Venturi before, right? We spoke Robert Venturi, the decorated shed. So he was defending a possibility of making architecture in which you have a plain building, which has a sign on the top telling, I am a monument. Right. So it's very famous illustration by Venturi. This is doing the opposite, not telling things, but doing that with a real representational element. This section, again, there's like a real construction project with all dimensions, the containers to get the functional elements, which is the office and the toilet, a little less, and the really minimalistic exhibition space. This is Daniel Libeskind, and probably of the projects, this is one of his most balanced. Sometimes he's like over-aggressive and it's not easy to imitate. In this case, the project is mostly the extension. The original building is almost untouched. So for our case, it's a little bit easy project. Also, the complexity comes from the formal definition, right? So like getting elements from the border of the site, connecting the new and the old, some in between diagonal, the other side, and then connecting. So the geometry has something between logic and randomness. This was very cool in 1990 Nowadays, this is like a really over repeated and overdone. And to do this, you need to have very solid reason for that. Otherwise, it's like a one more kind of a pseudo or falsely random exercise. But well, that was, again, among libelcies, quite interesting. See how, from the photo we can see, it is very clear subordination of the extension. Extension is clearly added to the existing building. Existing building is still the main, the center, and every piece, even being larger, because this part in the bond is quite large, the span is smaller, so still is like a secondary to this main building, which is the origin of the renovation, right? This is a floor plan. This is a nice drawing. As it happens in many occasions, we have a difficult context. So this is a street which looks like a road. At least they were clever enough to make it very soft. Right? When I see many of the projects at school, we can see only the arrows and the asphalt of the road, as if we were happy to be like a road engineers. And it doesn't make sense. We just see the asphalt, right? But obviously, this is like a almost an anecdotic part of the drawing, and we see only the green, right? And here's when we understand a little bit why things are done like this, right? So like secondary facade to the street, another element to the street. This is a little bit asymmetry we were criticizing with the sand dune before, but the elements are so different, and then you have many more elements to counterbalance that movement. That's not more asymmetrical achievement, but a set of elements creating a whole, right? And landscape completes this kind of connections or divisions and movement lines. You see also that the drawing is very subtle, but some of the gestures just go inside the other buildings and become something different, right? So this becomes like one element could be one full building with a courtyard inside, right? Which is following the other one. And then this still could be another building which relates to this other garden. So there is much more elaboration than just a random juxtaposition of boxes around the site. I wish probably the conditions were very strict, but I wish there was a bit more interaction with the existing building, right? Because this cut is too sharp. This would have worked much better if you had some kind of a thing happening there in which the extension and the existing are a bit more closely related. But well, probably the conditions were quite strict in this case. This is a plan. This is construction drawings. We should reach this kind of level in which we really know the thickness of each element, right? And the proper position of the stairs and the real size of the elevator and so on. We don't need to annotate so much because it is not really a construction drawing will do. But when you reach this level, you really know how the element will be constructed, right? So you have clearly a communication element, which crosses to another communication element, right? And then a different movement. So you have like two stairs which are vaguely related, cut into different directions. Then just exhibition space, right? This looks like it just exhibition walls going around. So like creating some fluid movement space, right, around, but without losing too much clarity and having some ending points and some connection points. See how elevator and stair are very closely related, very near one of the other. And there's plenty of space around the elevator, so you're not really blocking the way of people moving. So within that randomness, there's some kind of very, very strict geometry also organizing things, right? And that's the difficulty of this balance, this kind of work, this way of working. And this is the connection with the existing building, which is just putting the doors and one wall against the other. I don't know if we can see this in greater detail, but what we commented, see how there is always a small in-between space between the existing and the connection, right? And almost a tunnel which goes inside the window. So really, the existing building doesn't lose the integrity. It's not like sticking straight one building to the other. All these are the spaces you get inside. This is the long corridor. And this is exterior, right? So you see some element is just very light. And this is so interesting because in the plan we cannot see, but if we see the reality, we have very heavy, very solid elements and very light, almost immaterial elements. And this helps also to give some balance in the site. You have some kind of suggestion of what you can see through, right? Interestingly, this glass is over kind of ground water running around was some stream under the building, right? So the view and the flow of water is some kind of relating. The building, actually, all building is not great, nothing, but obviously it's not touched. The design, I'm not so sure. This kind of piece in the front, it makes sense at this time, but this is like a little bit. Well, I'm not sure this is the best of the design. It is obviously getting the geometry you have in plan and putting in elevation and finding some lines. But at points I doubt it does not have the strength you see in plan. It's like a little bit over designed. Facades are terribly difficult, and it's very easy to be overdoing or underdoing in some. And I think, well, I cannot say because I was not there, but probably this is the hand of some intern or some staff working in the office, right? The project is very strong and very clear, and this facade is a little bit too much. That specific window. This border is more interesting, but well, that's my opinion. Okay, this is more details which insist in the importance, the difficulty of connecting new and old in some way, right? So we should reach in part of the building this level of definition, at least by final, right? Not everywhere because it takes a lot of time, but we should be aware of how thick are elements, how is the structure, how it move around, how thin are the windows and where they are positioned, right, against the original ones and so on. Okay, and this is the model. This is where I see like a too much overdoing in the window design of the facade. But okay, but it happens only in one building, so it's not. This is kind of repeating. Yeah. This is interesting. The Enrique Miralles. This is the architect who died too young because he worked too much. So do not overwork. Professor Song worked in his office. She studied with him, so she knows very well. Miralles goes into he's very unique. It's very hard to classify. It's more of an architect than a Libeskind. Libeskind is kind of a sculpture artist, a designer, but Miralles is a real full architect. So all the construction details, the structure, everything is studied in his office. It's not outsourced like it happens with the other buildings. And almost everything is tested, and it's very much architectural, very much tectonic. And I would classify him more as organic than as a deconstructivist or so on, right? So buildings are like really living organisms and more fluid. So this is, I think, only the project planning extension in which the structure is clearly understood as a truss, but a little bit deformed, right? A little bit unique truss to make a big roof because the original building has big roofs also. But as soon as you get in the extension, things become a bit more free and you create big space for the exhibition below. This is the plans. See how the existing building, again, is very plain architecture. There's nothing great. Right? And the extension is not filling the gap, but just creating some kind of a flow between buildings. It's like air or water flowing through, which creates the spaces for the administration or the access and the exhibition elements, which will be actually piling next to the existing building, right? Like creating enough spaces for those exhibitions. And so on. Actually, those two are rotated. And another thing which is interesting, the extension is very strong formally, but fits quite well in image and in plan. It's clearly secondary, it's clearly an extension of the main building. And even if there's some kind of symmetry, the logic is very easy to follow, right? At least I think so. It's not easy to achieve this point, because this is already quite a mature Miralles, so he had a lot of experience here. Well, this is the detail of the plan. When you do this kind of very organic plans, see again the opportunity to make something which is formally recognizable, so you understand you are in a clear space, to leave some space between new and old. Well, this is all new, right? And then to put furniture and other elements very much following that flow. Very often in this kind of project, furniture and counters and so on really break the idea because they have totally different geometry, right? A very intelligent way to connect a stair, for example, to give some space to this corner. So we have always minimum space to move around. A good corner was hard also to make, but connects very well this kind of movement around the building, right? And then the spaces created are quite logical. So it's not useless exhibition rooms. They are quite all well organized, right? So they have good proportion and they are easy to understand as independent rooms, the same as the circulation is easy to understand as circulation. If you try to do this kind of architecture, which is possible, it takes a lot of work. It's important you still are able to recognize the architectural space within the roof, the structure, the movement element, the rooms, no matter how much free you are in the definition. And I think great part of the success of the Miralles come from this being very, very architectural. Right? Whereas Libeskin was, well, that project was a good project, but it was much more abstract, was much more making the sculpture and putting it on the scale of architecture. Well, this is the model. You don't need to complicate so much, but there is obviously a fascination with this wooden structure and this kind of reinterpretation, a more free way, more like dissolving into something more immaterial towards the forest or the trees. And it is important that trees are here because they are also part of the composition, right? If you see this roof is kind of following also the logic of the trees behind. But still, they are not imitation of nature. They have some kind of a connection of opening instead of being just a conventional shelter. Well, it has many readings. This is the Oscarsson, the Skåne Museum extension in Lund. This is a bit more, say, quiet, right? A bit more, let's say, down to earth, more like a formal architect construction. This is, of course, one composition which has been repeated over and over. This kind of box with windows, playing with the square shape and the randomness. You can see it in Sana and many others before, right? But still, this is one element which contrasts with the plainness, the almost industrial character of the rest of the building. This is a way of drawing which is very much trendy in the 2010s, like a bit more informal, a bit pinkish and grayish, like trying to take out the formality and the technicalness of the drawings we saw in Miralles, for example. Miralles is really, really old school. His drawings are really, really technical drawings, right? This is like a more between girls' manhua and illustration and fashion design, right? What is interesting here, we have a very solid building, right? Very solid building, and the extensions are like trying to connect to the garden, right? It's like following this kind of movement towards shifting the center of gravity and ignoring a little bit the other pre-existences there. With the green and the access having a very soft connection with the courtyard inside. So this is like a really, really simple, but very effective. Sometimes we don't need to complicate too much, right? And I think this project, the most strong is this connection of the garden and the interior courtyard of the building, from which we will understand how all the exhibition spaces are done. I think this is a museum. You see the drawing. So you have a clearly one central space and then the courtyard and so on. The access is a little bit tangential, but this one trick we have seen very often in recent days, right? And then the building articulates slowly towards the park, right? The line is very clear, but still there's some kind of a continuity of movement and space design and so on. And this kind of a atrium is the one which connects to lobby and the courtyard on the other side. There's small gestures and things going around, which makes sense in the context. And you see a lot of arrows. This is also planning to have this kind of visual connection to places of the building, but also to the exterior landscape. So when you see, we can see the trees, we can see Pukansan, or we can see somewhere, you have to really demonstrate you can see it. So you can draw the mountain or the building you see as a reference and you express it. Draw it, don't say it, okay? Because if you say it, we don't have the image of it. What's the extension? You see the character is very different, much more relaxed, not so monumental, but still it has the character of public space. So this entrance, curiously, the door is the size of a window. This is a tiny door for a museum. It's like the smallest you will do in this kind of building. And I see it working because this really is showing itself as an extension, as a secondary building, not as the main building itself. Well, nice three-dimensional render. Also, important thing is the clear inclusion of all the context in the intent, right? In the design. Something you are trying to do is like this kind of a, well, this is not a stage, but many of you are trying to do an external stage. In this case, this fits very naturally in the diagram. It's in the perfect place. It is open, but still quiet. So you could feel one stage, well, this is not a stage, but a stage could work there, right? It's like a place for staying. While a movement is like more really through the park, right? Around one tree and so on. You don't need to make a hyper-realistic 3D render to show one idea. Sometimes it's better to be more simple and tell a clear story without losing so much time with the details. Well, this is the massings. I will pass over it. And then the extension with existing buildings, in which, again, the thing is very plain. You put glass between the existing and the extension, and then you create something totally new with another intention. This is the boxes of the entrance. This is like a really light wooden structure, just an in-between the city, the forest, and the museum. This is a Uri Maya favorite, Snoeta. So, okay, so we will not comment much more, but it's interesting that also this kind of organic element around the existing, right? This kind of connection with the green in between, and very soft border towards the city, in contrast with the very rigid, very formal opening to the other side. In this case, I think it's clear and well proportioned in that sense, right? And then also circulation is very clear, and the this also shows the different elements, right? This is also case study which Maya showed. Interestingly, we have like a very massive extension and then very silent extension on the underground. This is the photo. It's very photogenic, so it's very nice to photograph, right? One thing which is interesting, see this side extension, this kind of diagonal cut, just to point one open space, right? Those gestures have always some motivation. It's not something instantly thought. Well, this is the sketch. We don't know if before or after they finish the project. And the plan is interesting. You see again this cut here. You understand with the context, right? If we see this alone, it's not clear why you need to make exactly this angle. But in the model, we saw there's an open space there where you can see this garden and you can see the other garden from the building. See also how the extension has not as clear as in Moneo we saw on Tuesday, but this kind of hinge element, which at least formally connects the existing with the extension, right? With a lobby in between. So it's kind of element which allows for the stopping and rotation to the other side. And of course, we have the original building, the lobby, this kind of backbone and so on. The section is interesting because it shows you very clearly this sequence from the street, because this is all the style building, so you go half a floor up, but they have very continuous, very soft connection to this underground space with a big lobby in between. So, and you have a previous lobby, which carries you to the over the ground exhibition spaces, right? And obviously the main floor was in the upper floor over there. So this kind of a very interesting set of larger spaces going up and going down. When you make a public building with a larger space underground, the way you go down must be very, very soft, very natural. And with some in-between elements which really make you think you're in the main building, not going to the parking lot or to the storage space underground. And then the underground is one single space. Then when it is divided with walls, which you need for the museum, it loses a little bit of the attractive, right? This should have been like a small sports court or an indoor swimming pool more than exhibition space. Nice as it is, well, this is the stair, right? It should be like a really inspiring, pleasant stair with a lobby big enough to inspire you to underground. But as a museum, well, it's not criticizing it, it is a museum, right? But probably this space is too nice to be divided by exhibition panels. But, so the plan, actually the plan is very good. The scale of the exhibition elements and the spaces in between is very well balanced. Even the logic of going around in diagonal moving, surely this can be changed temporarily with the different exhibitions. So this is a good plan for an exhibition, but this space being unified and used only at once would have been like great. There's a detail, so the space is nice. Zumthor Columna Museum is one of the most popular case studies we have. Here we have a huge lot of slides, so we're 59 of 182, so we cannot see so much detail. But what is interesting here is also the simplicity of the apparent simplicity of the whole idea of the building, but the very sophisticated study of materials, the light, circulation, the spaces which are created. This is Mr. Zumthor, his works, and this is the building. Actually, this is a building, if you don't go to the site, it's very hard to appreciate, because it looks like a very massive, bulky, and kind of industrial. But it is mostly the ruins of a church, as it happened with many buildings destroyed after the war, with a new building at the top. So this is actually not such a massive building, and some in-between space, which is just a void space. The atrium we see very often between the original extension, but in this case, it's done vertically. which I think is the originality and the strength of this project itself, right? Then the windows are in purpose, very industrial and personal. It's like a big rooms which are looking for views in different directions. And this is so well expressed. So actually it's like several heads like looking around, right? It's like a surveillance towers. This is the original church, the destruction. Then how it was used. Actually, this was one extension, also would be interesting case study. This is a Gottfried Bohn we saw before. Bohn did many churches, and he rebuilt a small chapel and worked with the ruins to make a kind of romantic small church within the ruins, right? And Zumthor just kept all the layers of history in the extension he did later. This is the huge Cologne Cathedral we saw the other day. This is one of the models. I don't think this is the final. I think this is different proposals of the competition, not Zumthor. But there was difficulty to make an addition and keep the ruins. This is surely another element of the competition. Very nice building and very clear division between new and old. But probably Zumthor was the most radical, creating a unity with the new and old, being a bit more, how would I say, more radical, but following also this idea of creating a layer in between, but not being so obvious as the other proposals. So this is the concept diagrams. I will not go into them, so you may use them to show your process, right? You put in a big box, adding diagonal circulation, creating the program on top. This is the building floating with the space in between. And then creating the directionality, adding the floors and the layers, putting this kind of 4 towers to look for the views over the landscape. And again, what we saw in the previous project, if you open windows for specific views, show it. And this is one way of showing it, right? So find the strategies to show things so we can believe you and we can understand much better what you are doing in your project. Then of course the city circulation. Actually, those sketches, I don't think they're Zumthor's office. I don't know who did this. And finally, you have the original, the movement layer, and then the ruins and the green, right? So there is a connection of everything, but you have the religious element is preserved, totally independent, and the museum is kind of a zigzag circulation through the ruins. This is very close to Sverreffen in Landmark Museum, right? In another way, this kind of a zigzag kind of walking, wandering around the ruins. And interestingly, one connection to a hidden courtyard, which is also one of the elements we are dealing with in our project. We have the back garden, or we may have several if we design them in that way, right? So it's very clear diagram. This is like the minimizing of the elements and the symbolism of that's right. The ruins, the celebration space, and then the exhibition, the history, the museum itself. Nice sketches. It is nice to see those drawings. This is quite probably advanced stage of the design, but it's nice to see the thinking process. Right, you see the plan, sketch in pencil, the three-dimensional element, the elevation. Actually, diagonal elevation from the corner, right? To guess how the building is. Very basic drawing of the plan without detailing. This is Professor Song's shade, like in the photo and exhibition. And then, yeah, how you make this section, right? How those spaces behave. See how those rooms with the views are important spaces. As it happens in our building, the top floor is like the one with the views. Huge spaces, which are this void, right? And then the more functional, and then the void between the ruins and the initial building, and so on, right? So there is a lot of studies. Things do not come instantly, right? Even with for people with that kind of long experience and expertise, things take thinking, seeking for alternatives, checking, correcting, and making things better and better each step. Which is not doing one thing and then doing another different thing, right? It's like following this idea and little by little finding the best solution for those ideas. Well, floor plan in very much Zumthor style, but with all the ruins there. There's the Gottfried von renovation of the church, and the museum, which actually is very much Zumthorish, right? You have wandering entrance, and you keep discovering spaces. You go into the ruins, or you go into the garden, but yet see space by space. You have a long and narrow entrance, but huge, very much in a scale with a huge building where you need a huge door, right? Then you have the entrance with probably the reception desk. Then you have one main space, which is larger, right? Then the courtyard or the access to the wandering space to the ruins, right? And all those mission spaces are smaller than the celebration spaces inside, right? And the courtyard has right the scale of the added volume here, right? So you go narrow, large spaces, but this is quite cozy, quite controlled space. I don't know if this wall existed, was done, but if it was open, it would be like a too diffuse exit to the rest of the park, right? So there's a very nice transition between the small, the medium, and then the large exhibition, right? It's like a sequence of 3 or 4 different scales. Well, again, this is a set of floor plans and sections in which you can spend hours looking for small composition tricks and ideas on how to make those elevators or those toilets, those stairs working naturally within the space. Okay. See how you go tangentially to the stair or tangentially to one exit, right? Or how you go on the opposite direction to the toilets, but you have totally independent lobby, and you will never see the doors, but you will understand this is the toilet space and so on, right? So everything is so carefully planned here that there are plenty of things you can take for your repertoire. Section, the same, no details, just this is very clear, right? So the section demonstrates the building is not as massive, not as aggressive as it looks from the exterior, which is rather protecting and creating a very mysterious space in between. Wow, also a beautiful section. This is all new building, but see how many different scales you have, depending on where you have views or important spaces. This is one of the lounges for taking rest, right? Also, minimalistic but very well done facades. Again, put your sketch paper over this and learn to do this kind of change of material, texture, position of windows and proportions. So you get accustomed to those proportions, those shapes, and this way of composing elements. Well, more sections, stair. Again, you can see such a variety of spaces, even though this is very much a casual section, right? The section through the elevator is always mandatory, but it's not one of the most flattering in the projects. However, then 3-dimensional study, this is circulation. One thing which I think is worth mentioning is the simplicity of the circulation, right? You have very clear elements up to the way. There's not much labyrinth there. The circulations are quite clear. Not too simple, but quite clear. Well, facades as we commented. And the final building. This is the problem of not putting a big dripper enough in the windows. Okay, we have to. Okay, the construction, there's micro piles to make the building without touching the existing. And this is the plan of the micro piles to be able to build on height without destroying anything of the existing building. We don't need to go so far, but when you are going to excavate in the existing building or do something on top of it, we have also to decide which technique you will use for that. And this year we have to do it. Right? You don't need to do it, but if you excavate under or you build over without touching things, you need to decide how this will be done. All this is technical drawings, how this is done. And then again, the combination of existing elements with the new ones and very elaborate. This is new, this is modern, but it's very elaborate just to have some kind of counterpoint to the other elements, right? Telling, okay, this is precious, but we can do also precious elements in another style without destroying it. It can be assemblies, and all that needs a lot of neutral ground. They don't need to fill it with many, many things, right? Because very few elements remain. We put some precious, more functional entrance next to it, and then just a big, huge, neutral canvas to hold all those gestures, right? This is the famous porous facade, which has become trendy and everybody wants to build, but it is really hard to make, but still a possibility. Here, the merit is to make it look kind of random. It's kind of decomposing, pixelated, or I don't like a vaporous solid facade, which apparently creates a very mystic, very soft lit interior. And this is photos of the construction. And then the finished museum with this kind of contrast between very lit, very clear rooms and very dark rooms. This is a museum, but in any kind of public building where you want to create many sensations, like those doing this kind of a reflection or healing center or meditation, this kind of a variation of the spaces, scale, light, character, you could have inspiration or examples on how this is done in many buildings, right? You don't need to have always huge window to the south, whatever. There's only one possibility. Well, stairs, again, minimalistic, as Suntor likes, and very endless of very careful connections between different materials. Well, the detailing of those minimalistic, but still very logic on the way we use elements. And almost all material you can imagine, right? Metal, concrete, stone, wood, precious root wood, and so on. So this is a door of stone. In terms of experimenting with materials, this is one building in which almost no material is untouched, but yet it's not noisy building. The scale helps, but also the care where the change of material is done and the detailing is very logical, right? Well, simple lettering and wow. This is the room we saw before. There's kind of a huge volume we saw in the section with the observatory towards the city. This is clearly a rested space. And so just the simplicity of making a huge window and then making the walls with a real timber. So you have that texture of the timber in a building which is very cold. This is mostly bricks and stone, right, and concrete. So you feel that like being in a really cozy, really luxurious place with those huge curtains, not plastic sticker imitating wood, right? And the endless effects of light. So it's kind of interesting. So, you know, because we have the experience when the light goes through many small holes, actually it happens like a small photo camera, right? Actually, if you have if the sunshine hits directly that facade, you will see the circle of the sunshine repeated through the holes. If there's a sun eclipse, you will see the moon shape in this kind of projection. So this happens also under the tree leaves. You will see that small circles. This is like a really projection of the shape of the sunshine through the small slits of the leaves. This is why this is so interesting. So you see, this is the round sunshine. So this is the camera projection of the sunshine roundness. well, existing and new, and integrated furniture, and yeah, locker room. Locker rooms can be nice also. Right. Yes, lockers. And this is the exit to the back courtyard. This is the wall we saw before, right? Which lets you see the view of the buildings. Again, trees are important, the intermediate layer, but fits very well next to this lobby, right? See the simplicity of the window, the door. You see the size of the building. This door may be probably 3 meters high, right? It's not a 2.03 centimeters, which is the standard one. This door is very much in the proportion of this room itself, and it's not in the center. Is 1/3, so you have a small space for sitting, but still it's not in one border, because then you have the entrance to the exhibition space and so on. These are all very small details, but demonstrate that everything is thought about, right? In a space which looks like oversimplified. This is the typical space that uneducated people say, oh, I can do it myself. This is just a box. Well, there are many things which are not so obvious there, right? And these are the things you have to be able to read and try to do in your projects better if you can. We have always to, the question is always, can I do better, right? If not, at least as good as this. Right? The courtyard, really nice space, right? Everything is very much proportioned. We could speak and comment on every little detail. Same with the kinds of materials outside, back to the street, and so on. After that, is an architect's Franciscan Education Center in Seoul. This is near Toksugun. Is actually a nice building. It's tough seeing this after Chumdol, right? Because it's a good project, but okay. So the existing building is like a really not such a great building, but okay, the Franciscans have some tradition and they wanted to keep it. That's reasonable. The extension is clearly a minimalistic glass box. And here we have the difficulty of making glass boxes elegantly fitting the existing building. Right? I'm not sure the building performs very well thermally or in terms of light, but that's what design is quite elegant. And it's a good project. So this is the existing building. Actually, with the renovation, it became better, which is a good thing, right? We always try to improve things to enhance what already exists. This is the two guys, and this is the photo as it was published. And then the special, so interesting thing is this new facade, which has clearly a lot of light control there, right? A very simple structure. And this additional dot, which creates this kind of very much a monumental space, right? Again, the details are very simple, and this is one of the virtues of this project. This is a top window, which again, it is very deep in section. I'm not sure how this space works in Sama. Surely they have some way of shading. Making such a huge horizontal window in glass is kind of suicidal, but looks nice. Okay, then it has elements, new stair. Okay, but no. Restaurant de Meron Tate Modern. I think it's one of the last projects here. It's a huge project. This is interesting because it is in the huge side of the scale. Very industrial building. And I think the positive gesture of Restaurant de Meron is keeping that huge space, that monumental space, as kind of a interior space, which is almost as exterior, right, in terms of scale. The whole entrance is a ramp going to the main exhibition space. At this scale, it works very well because it is a little bit like this kind of unusual experience of going down in a soft slope. So it happens in the Pompidou Center. It's kind of connection with other cultural facilities. All those guys, huge building. The back is the second extension, which is controversial. Some people love it, some people hate it. I have to go and see it. I was not there to give my final opinion on it. Well, this whole history is really, really huge industrial space. when you reach those buildings, those spaces are imposing, and it's very hard to think what to do with it. So one good choice is, okay, we keep the huge space, which is monumental, and then it just connects to smaller experience spaces in the service areas on the sites, right? Again, as in the Franciscan here in Seoul, but a little bit more elegant, glass extension, glass box with very expensive unitized curtain wall system. Everything is expensive with Earth and the Maroon, right? And also, surely this is a carved new openings to have more access, keeping the scale, but making also a big effort in a very heavy building. Well, probably again, the merit is to keep the largest space, so the industrial character doesn't disappear. With those ramps in which people sit and so on. This is a little bit in the middle, but here the scale is so huge that it's not the same as sitting in front of the door of a building at the entrance, right? Well, this is different art installations, and this huge space allows for really huge artworks, right? Or having the experience also with the material of the floor and so on. So the tactile experience is also important here. Earth and the Maroon are very good with the materials. Usually they experiment a lot to push them to the limit. The extension had many changes. It was controversial. It was huge. It was hugely expensive over time and so on. They kept the consistency of using the same kind of brick and then some geometrical line, right? And then some diagonal, creating like kind of focus to the old building, but becoming, as we see many examples, more free, more individualistic as you get away from the existing building, from just another box, right? Which could be one of the boxes of the original building, to something totally new. Very difficult project, whatever. But again, this had so many changes that it's hard to know how would have been the original idea here. Again, as you're far away from the building, again, this is a very simple gesture, but a huge gesture. When we see the complication of a structure to make those things, we doubt a little bit on this being really appropriate or convenient. But this is something you can do in a monument, in a building which is really exceptional. It's not like everyday construction. So this is, let's adapt on how much should we go over the logic just to make something monumental. It's a question mark. But it works, so the structure works well. You have the diagram, which is very clear. So it's a huge space. Then you have all the existing spaces connecting, and then another secondary connection to the new building, right? And then tertiary element to the cities, kind of urban open door space. This is the whole process of construction. The plan, also very nice to draw a plan, but you see very clearly all the large lobbies and circulation spaces, which are very clear, very well connected. And then all the black is just the smaller rooms and the more functional spaces. Right, this is upper floors. Again, you see how the diagonal allows to have a nice garden. So in this case, see how the other diagonal doesn't follow the street. This is what we insist often. You don't need to follow the street lines always, right? The context may suggest some gesture, but you may tweak it in some way to make it a bit more dynamic or to give it more tension. So you give some independence from something random as a street. See how, for example, the entrance, which is classical and very formal, very symmetrical, it has kind of response in the extension, but then it breaks the symmetry. So this kind of a connection, but also differentiation between the two blocks. Again, you can spend hours looking at those buildings. And then as you go up, things become a bit more simple. Right? This is the section. So probably up to some floor is like a more administration, more plain space, and the exhibition goes in the lower parts. Interesting in section is the connection of those spaces, right? How they have always large space. Where are the hubs which will distribute you to other areas? Well, secondary section, program. Again, this is the result of the program. You can draw a program like this, but to do this, you have to have at least the clear final definition of program, which still many of you do not have. Cannot believe. Well, stairs, this is already the design, the huge elements in the big voids in the buildings. And these photos show you the complication of those structures. Okay, this works, but there's a huge cost, a huge effort, not only material and money, but in terms of engineering and study and so on, with the brick on the exterior being an added difficulty. So here, there's been a lot of controversy over the opportunity of doing this or being a bit more humble in terms of formal definition. So this is the brick details. Actually, it's the oversized brick because the walls are very big and they need a lot of steel connections, and there are hours and hours of construction. It looks great, but it's like a really work of engineering, right? To hold those bricks on the facade. I don't know how much engineer hours are put to make sure this works, how many mock-ups they have to do. The result is spectacular, no doubt. But if you want to do this kind of thing, which is possible, you know what you have in front of you, okay? Okay, so in this huge scale, that endless perforated brick layer is the impossible but built. Okay, next spaces, always night photos are flattering, and then this is again Enrique Miralles, one extension which was built. You have the original building, then the extension, which is quite strange. This is the opposite of Zumthor. Zumthor is like a minimalistic and having something precious. This is like a horror vacui. Everything is filled with things around. It's like a pure passion. All the kinds of redesigned Baroque windows, Dutch windows in modern, with the concrete, with the brick, with large glass, with the small glass, vertical, horizontal, organic, formal, everything is here. But then the merit of here is creating an urban space in the back, which is quiet and according to them pleasant. I have to say this, so I cannot say. This is Miralles and his second partner and wife, second or third, I'm not sure. Well, the last one for sure. But you can see, well, fresh and much younger. You can see the shade of his eyes, right? Like already. Okay. So. Well, again, if you see the plan, again, this is like a really old school plan. We don't have better. It has all the dimensions. This is like a really plan for building. This is not telling to the construction company, okay, you build in some way. We know how to do it. We know the dimensions and we know all the assemblies and so on. That's okay, very architectural. The existing building, this is Old Town, is very organic. So the city is very regular. And the extension is very tiny compared to the existing building. So it's really secondary. But differently than Libeskin, you see that the interior space follows this kind of flow of extensions. So there's much more interaction between new and old, as we saw in the previous museum project. Right? It looks very messy, but it's quite controlled. There's not so many gestures, and it has a lot of inspiration of the existing. Like you're going one step beyond and keeping the logic of the circulation, the movement, the square, which kind of invites towards the entrance, has some kind of depth, right? Which connects very well with the other side, and so on. So the extension and the existing are totally different languages, but they match very well to each other. The existing building is very heavy, the extension is much lighter, right? The rooms are rectangular, kind of, or trapezoidal. The new ones are a bit more fluid, right? Well, this is the side view. Actually, this is totally different, like a almost industrial building. Again, this is like a reworking traditional windows in a very weird way, and then just making something totally different. The side facade, which is becoming suddenly more urban and more formal, more like following the city. When you go to the courtyard, this is something that the Earth and the Mirror do often, right? Like a load-bearing wall being cut and floating on the air. It's going to be manneristic or being artistic in some way. You go from formal to more free until, well, I cannot say because there's so many things here that we don't stop talking. Again, probably Mirales was one of the best in this kind of architecture worldwide, but you don't need to go so complicated because that architecture kills you, literally, right? Especially when you want to control everything. So in his office, they would have like a 1 to 5, 1 to 2 models of all those windows, the mock-ups, the details. One project like almost one life is spent, right? And after 5 projects, already spent 5 lives, right? And interior, curiously, is quite gentle. It's not so much complicated, and we can see very clearly the new elements. There's always this space, this tension, touching, not touching, the formal arches for construction and the other more free arches for the new space and so on, right? So the new and old work quite well. Again, you have a concrete, you have plaster, you have timber, you have glass. It's too much, but here it works because everything is very well worked out, right? What is the main meeting spaces, structure, the section. If you see the drawings, actually, they are quite logical. They are not so strange. And since you will have the handout, you might spend some time drawing over those sections because most of you are doing the kind of class additions around, and it's not easy, right? And those are quite wise. It's not just the contour of these additions you make, but also how you modulate the glass and the structure which supports those elements in between. Well, this is the photos. If you see whether the context, the building actually works quite well. It's kind of old buildings, like a artificial ruin there, in which the main buildings keep their own materiality, their own presence without any kind of aggression. This is why you see this is one of the most expressionistic extensions we have, but they're always so respectful with the existing building, right? It's just like accompanying it, giving it a new function, enhancing it, but never trying to compete or to make a huge change. In case of the student club here, that's a different case, right? Because this very plain building has not such a history, such a significance. But when we have nice buildings, unless we make them much better, there's no need to start over destroying things more than necessary. Okay, this is some of the visions. And this is just last slides. I added this because it was interesting. This is the Team 10. In the CIAM Congress for International Architecture meeting, under the tree, but under the tree, with chairs, table, a lot to eat and surely to drink. And I wouldn't be able to distinguish all of them, but they were like a really intelligent, talented people trying to find out how things should be after the orthodox modernism. And many of the architecture we saw, from Tumtor and Miralles to the others, are very much inspired or started with the ideas of those guys, right? Not in the library, not in the office, but under the tree, in the field, right? So the meetings, actually, they liked to have this kind of open air, informal discussions. Allison Smithson is one of the famous couples there, right? Peter Allison Smithson, British couple. And here, I wouldn't venture who is who. Probably this is Aldo Van Eyck. I'm not sure. Well, Santiago Porras knows Aldo. The others, I'm not sure. Probably this is Allison Smithson, but I wouldn't say. One of my Hube in Madrid went to work to their office. They say, those British are so racist. So, okay. This is Peter Allison. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I wish I knew them. And this was very interesting because this is the panel kind of manifesto they did in the CM Congress. It was 59, I think. The house, street relationship, and then house, street, district, and city. It is refreshing to see this is kind of a full wall, right, with just a collage. Probably each of those squares are like a A1 or I don't know, maybe A2 size, a large excision panel. They have just a concept and see how the whole story is 3 keywords and just people. People relating themselves and the space between people. And then a few drawings maybe just 30% of the full panel. Well, this is like the image which we could think about it, but the sunshine, one person, movement. But the drawings were the projects they were presenting for the Congress, right? Which is interesting, but this is old-fashioned, really old-fashioned, but also a way to convey ideas, right? People is first. Those guys didn't start telling Congress of Architecture. Our concept is, no, we're building for people. Yeah, the life is in the street, and the street allows people to relate. And then the project we do are based on those very human basic actions, right? And we found it just eating together under the tree, as Socrates would do with his students in old Greece. And this is chosen by Professor Song. So after that, we see what on earth are we doing with Korean cities? Everywhere, but especially Korean city, right? We have one of the most beautiful rivers on earth. And this is just a crazy source of pollution, noise, and stress. And no comment. Okay, so it is your generation's work to do something better, which is not easy task. But in that Team 10, that generation of 1959, like 60 years ago, really put a lot of energy to change things, to do something better. So the question is, can we do better, right? In all orders? This is the spirit of the architect, right? Against the usual reply, 할 수 없어요. 우리나라엔 이렇게 합니다. Right. The 할 수 없어 is not architect's mind. Okay, enough for lectures, and it was not so long, just a bit over 1 hour. Not bad for 182 slides. Original talk had 250. I just shortened. Good. Any question or comment about this? Yes.
For the Kugler Museum,
Yes.
the opening has the window following to urban context.
Right.
And is that in the plan, is that also following to the urban context because they have different scale
Right.
rooms? So
Right.
well, maybe a Junter concept, maybe Junter about that.
Well,
Is what I
this is right. So actually, I think this one. What was it? So many diagrams here. Well, it was one of the drawings around there. Yeah, here, right? So this is expression, but The difference with the process of diagrams you see, for example, in Bartingles, BIG, which is pretty formalistic. They have some kind of a context, but then there's almost nothing behind. It's the diagram built in some way. It's the anti-sumptor style. Here, this kind of extrusion to the top is having something just another layer, getting light and getting air and view. And it has to do with the context. So you see that in Cologne, you always see the towers of the churches around. It's giving this kind of a very quiet, very plain, but still one more landmark. So I think it works in two directions. So many things you can say about those buildings. Important thing is that there's an intention to have some visual connection, and it is clear at some point, so people understand what it's up to. Then we can go to the building. We might disagree, or might agree, or might think it was successful, or we might think we can do better. Okay. I don't know if that replies your question. I don't know if that replies your question. Okay, good. More Chilmun, more questions?
Yes.
Yes.
About the last slide.
Last slide.
I'm really curious. Do you think Korea actually can change the pattern of making the apartment? Because they build it in literally 2 years. They can build a
Right.
huge complex.
Yes.
They do it really fast. Do you think that they will?
I have been asking myself that question for 14 years since I started teaching here. And I think eventually it will have to change, eventually. And I'm surprised it keeps, I am surprised it keeps going on, right? Because the population does not increase, but the construction pace is unstoppable. And it's very hard to say the reason. I think the politics and economics has to do with it. It's not pure architectural. It's not architectural at all. It's not urbanistic. It's more how the economy is made. Who holds the power in Korea? South Korea. Who holds the power? Who's the real power of the country? Samsung, LG, Hyundai, Darim, Kia.
Okay, but do you think it's connected because of the monopoly, but not because of the culture issue?
The interesting thing is, our invited critic, Mark Brossa, he wrote his thesis on the apartments. And he has a very clear explanation of all that. And there's many books, but he's very good. When apartments started with the Park Tetonyong, everybody used to have the hanok or toshi hanok or country house with the courtyard, the chicken, and nobody wanted to go to the apartments. It's kind of so there was a huge mentality changing campaign to make people wanting to have apartments. So movie stars, singers, idols would live in the apartments, and they would be featured in the magazine, say, we have central heating, we have views. And actually one of the views was one of the, we have, I can see Bukansan, and I can see whatever. And at some point in the 80s, it was like the shift. Everybody was like dying to have an apartment, to go to this kind of modern life with the elevator, the view, right? And suddenly became kind of object of desire. It's like I don't know, you're Korean, so I don't know what, but you're a generation who has been raised in apartments probably. So you don't know nothing, but the generation before had this kind of mentality change. So it's one thing. Still people of my age, and even people 10, 15 years younger, so like one generation below me, when I go to something old area of Seoul, they look at me like, this is very old, but they will redevelop, so they will be modern soon. Like kind of telling, this is not our city. We'll be modern soon, right? So if there's not that shift of mentality, right, in a new generation telling we can do differently, we can live differently, I don't think it will change a lot. So this is one thing. The other thing is Samsung, Hyundai, Lotte. they have a huge industry building apartments. If you can build 100,000 apartments per year, you have to keep building them. Otherwise, your company just goes down. So unless those companies do not consider shifting their production, their industry to the other way, it is their own survival. And again, those companies are very powerful. So they will keep pushing the politics to keep redeveloping and narrowing the green belt. You know, in Seoul, you have the green belt, which was 1960s, 1970s planning, telling, okay, this is the green belt, we will leave it. But 5-10 years ago, they started building in the green belt. Why? Oh, you know, Korea is such a small country. I'm going to have a place to build, so we have to build in the green belt. So it's like telling, we have green belt, and then the excuse for building this kind of very flexible mentality on the convenience of who knows who, right? But I think there are two things there. First, the mentality, the still people like and want, and maybe you need to live in apartments. If you have a family with children, it's very hard to live in other places because you are away from the Hagwon, you have a dangerous street. In Atlanta, you have everything. You have the market, you have the gardens, you have the Hagwon without going out, you are controlled.
That's why I'm saying that can society accept changes radically because they have the system.
Well, but it changed once, right? But it changed once, right? So it can change again, surely. Well, I don't think it makes sense to demolish everything, but things can be softened. The problem is the more you build, the less alternatives you have in terms of living, right? Another point is bigger and taller. It is very inconvenient also. So it's two things, the mentality and then the industry. And there's two powerful things. So I don't know. I wish I knew the future, but every time I see one neighborhood disappearing, I say, oh my God, there will be not a city left at all. It's just like a Danchi. And Danchi, we call it like a cheap suburbs. It's like a really second-class city almost everywhere else. Right? I don't know about Slovenia, but this kind of a Danchi is like a second-class living place.
Even the work class, I feel like
Urban planning is all generations.
because well, not the logic, but maybe the goal was the professors or anyone else want to give to the students is to build higher or to do more economics and to do that.
Yes, but this is like a very specific, very narrow vision of economics, which depends on the existing industry. I think the role of the university is questioning things, right? And looking beyond. When the university is just following the industry and just making more solid the status quo, it stops being university becomes kind of academy for training people, which I think is a pity. Right? So, and you see the generation gap, and I see all generation, and the guy teaching that is younger than me, but I feel like 2 generations older than like people of the 1950s, 60s. Again, if you have fresh ideas and you change the vision and you really make a revival of the university as a place for questioning things, it may change. But if university just keep employing the acolytes of those old guys, which just continue teaching the same things to learn because they cannot see beyond that, right? Then university will slowly and surely die, as it's happening now. The panic of Code is it is losing really influence. It's losing status. Why? So come on, it is in front of your eyes, right? That was another thing. So generation change is a hope, but we need a really decisive and aggressive generation to do that. And then the industry is who can fight against those having the power. And
I
those
mean,
guys,
industry
right,
work for people. People support the industry. That's what I have a conflict with. Okay.
right, but that happens everywhere. So Spain, the power is in the banks and the energy companies and communication. And when the banks are bankrupt, we use the tax money to rebuild them, but nothing comes back. Just we are the servants of the bank industry, and that's it. Right. And here, all those big companies just stand over many hundreds or thousands of small companies, select their cushion. When something runs, those companies just stumble, they disappear, but the big things just are safe because they have their parachute mattress on the bottom. That's anyhow, the problem is there, but the change is difficult. But again, as I said, mentality totally changed once in the 70s, 80s, right? So good change again. How? Well, it was a dictator who was able to do it. I don't know which is the next thing, right? That's a big question, but it is nice you ask because when people are questioning things, there's a hope of things changing. The problem is when nobody questions things. If nobody questions things, right? Okay. No more difficult questions? Okay, let's have a break and then we're going to the pin-up. And today we'll also finish on time, okay? So because I see you are almost dead. I don't know what happened with you.